Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I am here to talk about my top 15 books of 2019. This might be the first time I've ever done like an even number, well not an even number, it's clearly an odd number, but you know, like a rounded number as my favorite of the year. Because I feel like I just always talk about my 5-star reads, and those don't I don't read exactly 10 5-star reads or exactly 20 5-star reads, but this year I read 15 5-star reads, which made this very easy to plan. So I have 15 books to talk about. I'm really excited to talk about them, but I wanted to say a couple things first before we jump in. The first thing is that you've probably heard me talk about most of these books in my favorite books of all time video. If we're being honest, I don't think I've read a book since October that was a 5-star read, and thus, when I filmed that video, I had pretty much already read all of the books that are going to be on this list. But that doesn't mean we're not going to have a ton of fun, because I have fully ranked these. These are in order, up to my favorite book of the entire year. So before we jump in, I would love to hear your guesses for like what my favorite book of the year was. If you want to pause the video, go down and guess, and then let me know at the end if you got it right. You can guess my favorite book, you can guess like my top 3, just try to see how many you can name that are going to be on the list. See if you can guess what my favorite books of this year are going to be. I have 15 to talk about, and let's just go ahead and jump in. I'll offer summaries where I can, but mostly this is just going to be me gushing about books that I love, because I've talked about them a lot this year, and I just want to be able to share the joy. Coming in at number 15, we have Heavy Vinyl Volume 1 by Carly Usdin and Nina Vakueva. This brought me so much joy. I can't even talk about it because all I feel is joy when I'm holding it in my hands. This is like a 90s style girls working at a record store graphic novel or comic series, but it's also about girls who learn to fight so that they can defend bands as like a personal little fight club. And it's also super gay and has an adorable romance in it. Every word that I'm saying made me more sure I was gonna love this, and then I did. Loved it beginning to end. It is the most joyful celebration of girls having a fun time. And that's all I want sometimes. Sometimes I just want to be able to read a graphic novel that's about girls having a great time being joyful. I think that people deserve that. Everyone deserves the chance to read like a book or a graphic novel or a comic about themselves that they can see themselves in. That's just joyful. And to me, that's what Heavy Vinyl is. So I loved it. I can't wait to read more in this comic series. I love it for joy and joy alone, and that's that. At number 14, I've got Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. This is a collection of short stories and was part of the inspiration for my 2020 goal to read at least one short story collection every single month of the year. So let's thank Julia Armfield, debut author, for that. This is a collection of like horror, sci-fi, fantasy stories about womanhood, about different aspects of womanhood. Whether it's puberty, or breakups, or the horror of pregnancy. There are some queer stories about girls who love each other, girls who've fallen out of love with each other, but it's a lot about, like, horror on women's bodies, and putting the things that happen to women's bodies through kind of a horror and speculative lens. It is deeply unsettling and beautifully described, and I loved pretty much every story in the collection. I think I've said that my favorite story is Stop Your Women's Ears with Wax, which is about a girl band and girl band culture and girl fans of girl bands. It's just really, really great. I'm really glad that it inspired me to read a lot more short stories in 2020, and I think that you should check it out. If you want to know which stories are queer, I have like a full Goodreads review of this book that I will leave linked down below. You can check it out. If I have Goodreads reviews for any of these books, I will leave them linked below. Next up, we have All the Bad Apples by Moira Fowley-Doyle. This is a YA fantasy book about inherited trauma. Whee! Yeah, but no, that's kind of like legit the theme of this book. This is about a girl named Dina in Ireland, and on the morning of her 17th birthday, she inadvertently comes out to her family as a lesbian. So it's about that. Also on her 17th birthday, her older sister goes missing and is presumed dead, and Dina is the only person who's absolutely positive that her older sister isn't dead. And then this is also about Dina's family tree, starting in like the 17 or 1800s, and it's about silence, it's about enforced silences, and how women remaining silent about their history is how that history is allowed to repeat itself, about how generation after generation inherit this trauma and then are silent. And these stories aren't told, and so they just keep happening over and over again. There are a lot of different kinds of silence. It's silence about sexual abuse, silence about queerness, about pregnancy, love, lust, how women just keep inheriting the trauma of their ancestors and keeping it quiet, and about how it's trauma that demands to be screamed about. And this is very much about recent Irish history and the Catholic Church in particular, and their history with unwed mothers. So, this is like, I would say, an essential YA book. It's essential. Everyone should read it because it's heartbreaking and difficult, but it's so necessary, and it's a part of history that I think is important to look at. It's important to know about so that you can scream about it too. And there are a lot of gay characters in this, which is always a huge plus for me. Anything gay, send it my way. Coming in at number 12, we have Water Runs Red by Jenna Clare. This is a poetry collection by Jenna, who is a dear friend and fellow booktuber. This is about toxic friendship, about friendship breakups, asexuality, political revolution. It's a really, really excellent poetry collection. I haven't read a ton of poetry, to be totally honest, and that's something I'm planning on working on going forward because I loved so much poetry in 2019, but this poetry collection made me sob. It made me feel very specific feelings that made me cry a whole lot. It's also a really beautiful collection full of Jenna's poetry, Jenna's thoughts, lots of allusions to Taylor Swift, and it's just a really, really brilliant poetry collection. So I would say give it a read. I loved it because it made me cry, and pretty much every book that I'm talking about from here on out made me cry at some point, because apparently all I want out of fiction is stuff that makes me curl up in a ball and sob. That's me! At number 11, we have Real Queer America, LGBT Stories from Red States by Samantha Allen. This is a nonfiction book, the only nonfiction book on this list, unless you count Water Runs Red as nonfiction, which I guess you could consider that nonfiction. I don't know how we separate poetry. Like, I don't know how we put that in certain categories. This is nonfiction. It is about Samantha Allen, who is a trans woman going on a road trip with her trans guy best friend across red states in America and learning about queer cultures in these different red states, and about how in red states queer communities band together even more strongly than like coastal states and blue states. And it's about the incredible, vibrant communities that we create in these different places. I loved this book. There was a whole chapter on Utah, where Samantha is from and where I am from. We both grew up being queer, and we both grew up Mormon, so that hit a very particular, like, part of my heart. But all of this is brilliant. It's a book that I've said in the past made me feel really powerful and confident in my queerness. It made me proud of the communities that we have created in these states that have some of the most hateful laws about us, and how we have turned all of this tragedy into joy, and about how we honor one another and one another's tragedy, but still come together and create these wonderful, wonderful spaces and communities. It's just a really brilliant book that I loved. Yeah. Coming in at number 10, we have The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, which is a horror sci-fi novel. Now, there are a lot of weird sci-fi books on this list, which you probably already know if this is, like, anything but the first video you've ever watched on my channel. I live for weird queer girl sci-fi. That's like my life's blood at this point. This is about a cave expedition on a foreign planet. It's all set in this cave. It's about Geyer, who is the one who's going on the cave expedition, and the only person that she has communicating with her is her expedition leader. And the deeper that Geyer gets into this cave, the more she finds out that she hasn't been told the full truth about this expedition. There isn't a team helping her, it's just this one woman on the other end of the line. She starts doubting herself. She starts seeing things. Things aren't what they seem. And my camera's dying. Fuck it. Fuck it. Okay, we're gonna try this again. It's a new day, and now my camera is fully charged. So basically, this is a descent into madness, questioning your reality, horror sci-fi book. It scared the bejesus out of me. I was up all night reading this book because I was scared, but also I had to know what was going to happen next. And it's also got a queer girl lead. There's some, like, weird imbalance of power relationship potential there. Honestly, this is just, like, one of the most original books I've ever read, and I'm gonna keep recommending it constantly for a while because of that. Coming in at number 9, we have the other poetry book on this list, and that is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a novel in verse. It's about a girl named Ziamara in her Harlem neighborhood, and she's going through a bunch of different things. One of the things is that it seems like her relationship to the world has changed ever since she developed curves. She's also trying to use poetry to explain her relationship with her mother, to explain religion, her mother's connection to religion, the way that she's kind of fading away from religion. This book made me sob when I read it, and I don't think I was anticipating that. I was not prepared to cry through a novel in verse, but I did. Some of the stuff that this book says about religion and about an ever-changing relationship to religion and how that relationship changes, particularly if you have really religious family members, all of that just hit home in a very particular way. But beyond the personal notes, like, this is an incredible book about body image, about sexualization of young women, and how that completely changes how you see yourself, how the world sees you, the things that are out of our control that other people blame us for because of society. Like, there is so much here, and I had this book on my list of top 10 to read in 2019 because it was on so many people's favorite books of 2018 lists, and now here I am at the end of 2019. It's on my list of faves. You were all right. I'm so glad I decided to read this. Next up, coming in at number 8, we have Call Down the Hawk by Maggie Stiefvater, the first book in the Dreamer trilogy. This is the spin-off book to the Raven Cycle that is about Ronan Lynch. And that is all I will tell you about Call Down the Hawk, because there was a whole series that came before Call Down the Hawk. And despite what Maggie Stiefvater has said, that you can kind of jump into this book without the Raven Cycle, this is its own thing, I feel like you miss out on so much context if you do that, so I'm going to treat the 4 books of the Raven Cycle as, like, spoilers for the context of this video. Some of you, most of you, will know that the Raven Cycle is, like, my second favorite series of all time. I just recently did a reread in preparation for reading this book because my passion for the Raven Cycle knows no bounds. I don't know how to chill about it. I've spent the last, like, I don't know, 2 years deciding on what kind of Raven Cycle tattoo I'm going to get, because after I read the series in full, I was like, oh shit, this series means more to me than, like, anything. I still consider Harry Potter my favorite series, but, like, that feels like such a standby, like such a... It's been in my life since I was a preteen, so the Raven Cycle is something that I'm so passionate about, and something that I'm still planning on getting a tattoo for, and just continuing in this world is enough to make me feel, like, so incredibly joyful again. Not that this is a joyful book, like, a lot of, you know, messed up shit happens in this book, but it's returning to characters who I love so dearly and this world, and it takes the craziness of the Raven Cycle and it turns it up to, like, 11, which I live for. It's something that I love about the Raven Cycle, is that it seems like some of the fantastical elements are normal or they are less on the surface, and then all of a sudden it just gets kind of batshit, and I live for that. I love it, and I love this book, and I love Ronan, and I love Adam, and I love Declan and Matthew, and I love Jordan Hennessy, and there's the potential of me enjoying a couple of the other new characters that were introduced in this book. Not sure yet. This had like the most intense cliffhanger, the most intense reveals. I read this in a haze, and I loved it, and I cannot wait to read the other 2 books in this trilogy. They're going to murder me in cold blood. I can feel it now. I can't wait to reread this. It's just brilliant. So, it sits here. If we want to talk about a book that made me cry more than any other book this year, look no further than number 7, Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a middle grade novel. It was a 2018 release. It is about a girl named Ivy when her family home is destroyed by a tornado. She's also dealing with becoming a middle child after the birth of her young twin siblings. She's also dealing with the fact that one of the only things that she rescued from her home was this notebook that was full of drawings she had made of girls holding hands, and she saved it from the wreckage, and then it gets stolen. And Ivy hasn't fully dealt with the fact that she might be attracted to girls, and she hasn't told anyone else, so this is a really scary thing. I love this book so much. I've talked about it in numerous videos because of the fact that I feel like this book unlocked a part of who I was at age 12, who I was not knowing I was queer, but looking back on it, recognizing that that was some real gay behavior and how I was doing my best to cover it up, even not knowing that I was different yet. I am one of those queer people that didn't come out until way later in life. Even to myself, I didn't come out until I was an adult. And so being able to look back on my youth and recognize these signs that I was this young queer kid and didn't know it was a really emotional journey for me. So much of what Ivy goes through in this book is just all up in my queer feels, and it made me sob on like every other page, because every single time I read about an event, I just kept thinking, that was me, I've been there, I did that. How did I not know? Thank God this book exists. Yeah, Ivy Aberdeen. Okay, it's time for some more weird queer girl sci-fi. Coming in at number 6, we have On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden, my favorite graphic novel of all time that I read this year. Oh my god! This is a graphic novel with multiple storylines set about 5 years apart, and they both follow the same girl. A girl named Mia, so we start when she is in school and she meets this new girl and they start falling for each other. And then it picks up 5 years later when Mia has joined a crew of this spaceship, and basically they fly around and they restore old floating buildings. And in that storyline, Mia has been separated from this girl that she really liked in school, but she's tentatively thinking about setting off and trying to find her again. This is big and epic and romantic and absolutely gorgeous. The art in this book is incredible, and I don't say that lightly. I have read a few of Tillie Walden's graphic novels at this point, and I think she has, like, the most gorgeous style. Her use of color is incredible, and there are different sections of this that have a limited color palette, so you build so much emotion into these different colors when they're limited during certain parts of the book, but then there are these big explosions of color that create this version of space that's so organic and in-depth and interesting and completely original. Like, for example, their spaceships look like fish, and it's so gorgeous to look at because it's not just a ship flying, it's like this very natural version of traveling through space. I absolutely lived for it, but also this is big and epic and romantic, like I said. Like, this is a years-spanning love story between girls. There are multiple other queer characters, 2 middle-aged queer women in a relationship with one another, like a dedicated relationship, a non-binary character. This is a collection of people who have formed their own family quickly. There's so much affection there and so much care with how they speak to one another and so much passion, and I live for it. This is an epic graphic novel in that it's like 500 pages long. I would say if you haven't read Tillie Walden, please give her a shot if you are a reader of graphic novels. She's creating some of the most interesting work out there right now as far as queer women and queer women in graphic novel form. This is just breathtaking. Okay, we are into our top 5. So my number 5 spot goes to Tell Me How You Really Feel by Aminah May Safi. This is my favorite YA contemporary about queer girls. I discovered so many new favorite books this year that aren't just like favorites of the year, but are new favorites of all time in their chosen genres. This is an enemies to lovers YA contemporary set in Southern California. It is about Sana, a cheerleader, and Rachel, a budding filmmaker. And a few years before this book started, Sana tried to ask Rachel out, and Rachel assumed it was a joke, and so they have been bitter enemies ever since. Or, more accurately, Rachel has considered Sana her enemy ever since, while Sana has been pining from afar. And then through some happenstance, Rachel absolutely needs Sana's help for her final project if Rachel is going to graduate high school, so they are forced together. And while Rachel is trying to make this film project to make sure she graduates, Sana is trying to make a decision about her future that she's not talking to anyone about. I have a real passion for queer girl contemporary set in California, I think because they tend to feel like movies to me, and girls falling in love in film is so rare that I'm like drawn to it. It's why I loved Everything Leads to You and The Summer of Jordi Perez. Like, there is this urge within me to read about gay girls in California. And this is a book that breaks down the film industry so well. It talks about Sana, who is Iranian American, and how her mother has been dealing with different forms of injustice because she is in the film industry. Rachel is Jewish and Mexican, and she's also struggling with how she's going to make it in this industry being a woman of color. So there's this romance on the surface that's incredible. It's enough of a slow burn to work. There's like miscommunication straight out of a rom-com. Let's go with gay out of a rom-com. But it's also about love and heart and learning to openly communicate, and about two girls inspiring one another in what they want to create, which is so lovely. I think that's the other thing I love about books that are set around like filmmaking, is that especially if they're queer, I love this idea of queer love inspiring further creation, and it's just a really beautiful concept to me. So these are all of the reasons I love Tell Me How You Really Feel. I think it's a delightfully written book. It's fun, it's heartfelt, it's beautiful, and I love it. Speaking of incredible rom-coms, coming in at number 4, we've got Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This book is on, like, everyone's list at the end of the year, so I won't spend too much time on it because everyone has talked about this book at this point. This is a new adult romance about the first son of America falling for the Prince of England. Our lead is Alex, who is bisexual and Mexican American. This book made me laugh more than any other book I've ever read. It's covered in sticky notes because I didn't just read this book once this year, I read it twice. I really needed a pick-me-up around November, and I just opened this book again and read it because I knew it would put me in a better mood. But while it's also one of the funniest books I've ever read, it's also incredibly heartfelt. It's a joy. It's a joy, and it comes back to my love of film and how easy it is to see this as a film. Like, I'm such a visual person. When I consume things, I immediately want to adapt them in my brain. I like to see them in a visual sense, and it's so easy to do this because I have such a background in loving rom-coms, and there aren't that many rom-coms about queer people. And this is that. It's a delightful rom-com that's about two boys in the most intense of circumstances, who find a way to be open with each other, to be honest, to fall in love, to still have the comfort and intimacy to joke with one another, to change their world for the better, and I think that that's really beautiful and powerful. Also, I love this because I met Casey, and, like, these were all feelings that I already had about the book, but it was amazing to hear her talk more about the exact same things, about visualizing things as film, about how much she longed for more rom-coms about queer people, especially in film. I just love this book. I love it a lot, and I'm gonna keep rereading it because it's like my new happy place, and I think it's really important to have your happy place book, and this happens to be mine. Yeah, Red, White, and Royal Blue. Everyone's talked about it there. Now I've said my piece. At number 3, we have Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis. This is a historical fiction book set in Uruguay, and it is about a collection of 5 queer women, who find one another and find this island where they can be themselves. So this starts in the 70s in Uruguay, which was at that time under a dictatorship, and so there are a lot of really difficult things mentioned in this book. I have a full review up, I believe. If I don't, I will make sure to write out a list of trigger warnings that you can check out in that review. So please go into it knowing that. But this is a celebration. I feel like a lot of these books are celebrations, even though I sobbed through most of the books I've talked about. And I think it's because my favorite books, in order for them to become favorites, they have to elicit multiple sides of me and multiple sides of an emotional response. And this is a celebration. It's a celebration of queer identity. It's a celebration of our queer ancestors and the ancestors who were queer people of color, who fought tooth and nail for just their right to love, their right to exist. And it's about honoring the horrific things that happened, but also the bits of joy that we didn't get to see written about because it was forbidden to even be seen in public. It's also a shared mourning for the queer community, the members of our queer community that we have lost for various reasons. So it starts in the 1970s, it spans about 30 years of time in these 5 women's lives, falling in love, falling out of love, going through rebellion, these different shades of government and what it means for these women and their right to exist. It's an incredibly moving book that I'm so, so grateful that I got the chance to read this year. I have such a passion for queer historical fiction because I think, like books set in California where I want to see queer people in film, I also want to see queer people in history because we existed, we have always been here, but our stories are eliminated from history. So I love historical novels that get to be about queerness because it recontextualizes where we were. It refuses to hide our identities anymore in a past that history has decided was straight and cis, even though it wasn't. I think that is what I find most powerful about queer historical fiction, and this is just another brilliant book that I get to add to that collection of stories that I'm keeping near and dear to my heart. Okay, second to last, I feel like some people are going to think that this book was my favorite book of the year, so I'm wondering now, pause it again, if you already guessed, there are 2 books left to go. Which 2 books have I talked about this year that I didn't talk about yet in this video? I feel like most of you put the book that I set in my number 2 spot and my number 1 spot, so think about what could be number 1. In my number 2, my second favorite book of the entire year, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. Hands up for more weird queer girl sci-fi. This is not a poetry book, but it is incredibly poetic in the way that it is written. It's an epistolary novel. It follows 2 time travelers, whose nicknames are Red and Blue, and they are agents on opposite sides of a time war. So they are climbing up and down the timeline, making small changes, making huge changes, and as they do that, they see one another as the ultimate rival. And they start exchanging letters, and through these letters, they start to fall in love. So this is like a Romeo and Juliet time travel story that has a very different form of time travel than most other books or shows I've ever read or watched. It's not about jumping in a machine and traveling through time. It's a lot of just climbing through time, about braiding timelines into a central timeline. So a lot of people have said that they were lost during this book, which is totally fair. I was often lost as well. But the point for me is never about getting to that like 100% logical conclusion of how exactly the world works. It is about these 2 people overcoming the greatest divide possible between them. And both of these agents are women, so like I said, queer girl sci-fi again. but it's brutal, and it's sarcastic, and it's heartbreaking, and so full of love. It's utterly unique, and I've said that about a lot of books, but I feel like in 2019 I discovered so many unique books. That's what made this year so exciting for me, is that it isn't just that I found new favorite books. Like I said earlier, it's about I found new favorite books of all time, and I found new favorite books that set new standards for me, that set new standards for what I love to read. I didn't really consider myself a reader of sci-fi, and in 2019, that's what my whole year has been. I have read so much sci-fi. I can't even imagine me picking this book up 3-4 years ago and trying to dissect this incredibly poetic book that's unlike anything I've ever read before, that I really had to dig through to understand. I can't imagine loving it the way that I do now, because I've discovered so many new books, and it's opened up my horizons for what I love to read, and I'm really, really grateful for this book and for all the other books I read this year that I loved for that. So yeah, this is how you lose the Time War. Absolutely brilliant. Just gold standard material in my mind. I loved it. And now, we're here, we've gotten to the end of the list, my favorite book that I read in 2019. Did you guess it? That's the question of the hour. Is this video an hour? It feels like it might be. My favorite book that I read in 2019 is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. Woo! I feel like I've talked about a lot of books that have elements of this. It's about a crew on a spaceship. It's about queer women. It is about family aboard a spaceship. It is weird sci-fi. But I think the biggest thing is that I read this earliest in the year. I read this in April, and I feel like every other weird sci-fi book I read after that. So, I don't know, there was something magical about this book in that it's intensely character-driven. There's not a huge focus on plot, which I haven't even told you about. This is about a crew aboard a spaceship. The spaceship punches holes in space, creates wormholes for ease of travel, so that you can get from one planet to another faster. And this crew has just been hired to go out to a very distant part of space, punch an entirely new hole to a totally new place that has never had, like, ease of transit before. And it takes them about 2 years to get there. So this is 2 years in the life of the crew of the Wayfarer. And some people have said this reads like fan fiction, and I think it's because this book is so character-driven over plot. You're not really getting to hear about, like, the actual day-to-day tasks. There aren't a ton of huge events that happen. It's purely about building these characters' relationships to one another. Maybe that's just, like, my experience of fanfiction. That is why I'm drawn to fanfiction, is because I feel like so much media, stuff has to happen all the time, and my thing is, like, what if they just talk to each other for, like, a full season? You know, what if they sat down with a therapist for a season? And I think that while this isn't entirely that, it's close to that. It emphasizes these characters and their relationships over everything else. And it's also about Rosemary, who is the first character that we're introduced to, falling for another person on the crew who is a woman. It's about different cultures, celebrating different cultures and learning about them, about traveling through space and the passion for knowledge. I think at one point I described this as Star Trek by way of Firefly, because there is so much about this book. It's focused on, like, the power and strength of learning other things, of being explorers, and there is this sort of central governing part of the universe. But also every now and then the people on this crew are kind of assholes to one another. They do things that aren't strictly legal, and so it just creates this beautiful world, these beautiful characters who I thought I might care about, but at the end I wound up crying about characters I never would have anticipated crying about. I laughed. I loved every relationship. This is just a brilliant book, and I'm so glad that I got the chance to read it. I can't wait to read more in this series, to read more in this world, and to read more by Becky Chambers. I have said all the words I can, and I hope it makes sense that I love this book more than words can say. And that is why it was my favorite book of 2019. Okay, that was kind of a lengthy video. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope that I have told you about books that maybe you weren't sure about reading and I've convinced you to read them. Be sure to let me know if you guessed what my favorite book of the year was going to be, or if you guessed any of my favorite books. I would love to hear about it. Let me know your favorite book of 2019 and if you have read any of these and loved them too. This was an incredible year of reading for me. I feel like I opened my horizons so much and I learned so much about myself, and that helped me to learn more about what I love to read. And I'm really excited to take this energy into 2020 to continue discovering new things and pushing myself out of my comfort zone. Overwhelmingly, 2019 has made me passionate about discovering stories. I've always loved reading, but something about 2019 kind of shifted for me. It brought back that passion, and I'm really, really excited to keep moving forward with that passion. I hope you all have an absolutely incredible day. Thank you so much for watching this video, for watching any of my videos. If this is the first video of mine that you've watched, consider sticking around. Hit subscribe. We're gonna talk about a bunch of new queer books in 2020. Yeah, thank you all so much, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!